From nearly 40 miles away, the first thing you see is not a mountain range, not a chain of peaks, and not a ridge gradually rising from the horizon. You see one black shape standing alone. It rises almost 1,500 feet from the flat desert of northwestern New Mexico, sharp, jagged, and isolated against a sky so wide that the rock appears less like part of the landscape than something placed upon it. Roads curve toward it, dust moves around its base, long dark walls of stone stretch outward across the plain like broken spokes. Travelers slow down, lift their phones, and call it Shiprock. That is the name printed on highway signs and modern maps. It is young, practical, and easy to remember. 19th century newcomers looked at the formation and imagined a great sailing vessel crossing an ocean of sand. They saw masts, sails, and a dark hull rising from the desert. Yet the people who had lived in this country long before those surveyors arrived already knew the formation by another name. In Diné, the language of the Navajo people, it is called Tsé Bit'a'í, the rock with wings. Not a rock that resembles a bird, not a cliff shaped like feathers. The rock with wings. That difference is the entrance to the story. One name describes a passing resemblance noticed by outsiders. The other carries generations of memory. Shiprock tells us what newcomers imagined when they saw the silhouette. Tsé Bit'a'í tells us that the formation already belonged to a sacred geography, a living landscape in which mountains, rivers, canyons, winds, animals, and stones were not empty scenery. Each place had a relationship to the people. Each place remembered something. To understand why wings became attached to this lonely spire, we must first step outside the modern map and enter Diné, the traditional homeland of the Diné. Diné was not defined by straight borders drawn across paper. Its world was oriented by 4 sacred mountains, each associated with a direction, a color, and a substance of deep ceremonial importance. To the east stood the mountain of white shell. To the south stood the mountain of turquoise. To the west stood the mountain of yellow abalone. To the north stood the mountain of black jet. Between these mountains lay the homeland, not merely as territory, but as a moral and spiritual order. To live within it was to live among places where origin, danger, protection, and memory had taken physical form. In such a world, a formation as striking as Tsé Bit'a'í could never be only a geological curiosity. It dominates the desert around the 4 corners, where present-day New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado meet. From the open plain, the spire rises abruptly, its dark volcanic core cutting into pale sky. The long stone dikes extending from its base strengthen the impression of wings, but the traditional stories go far beyond shape. They speak of movement, rescue, monsters, hunting, sacrifice, and transformation. They explain why the summit is feared, why certain birds remain sacred, and why the sky around the rock once represented a danger no person could escape. There is a gentle story first, and it matters because it reveals one meaning of the wings before the darker tradition begins. In this telling, the Diné faced enemies closing in from every direction. There was no safe path across the ground, no canyon deep enough to hide them, and no place left to run. The people gathered and prayed. Then the earth beneath them trembled, the ground rose, expanded, and became an enormous living bird. Its body was broad enough to carry the people, and its wings unfolded across the horizon. The great bird lifted them into the sky. It carried them beyond danger, over dry plains, rivers, cliffs, and distant ridges. The people looked down and saw the land shrinking beneath them while the enemies who had surrounded them disappeared far behind. When the bird finally reached a country where they could live safely, it descended onto the desert floor. It folded its wings around the people it had saved and became stone. The shape that remained was Tsé Bit'a'í, the rock with wings, a guardian fixed forever in the moment after deliverance. In that story, the formation is a protector. It is movement turned into permanence. It is a living being that gives itself to preserve a people. The rock stands because rescue became landscape. That interpretation alone would make Tsé Bit'a'í sacred, but it is not the only layer. Another tradition reaches back to the earliest world, before human beings could travel safely, when the land was crowded with beings called Navajo, monsters, destroyers, or alien ones. These were not ordinary animals. They were forces of hunger and disorder that hunted people and made the world nearly impossible to inhabit. Among them was Yeitso, the great giant, whose size and appetite exceeded anything human beings could resist. Stories describe him drinking vast quantities of water and devouring those who crossed his path. There were horned monsters that charged across the open country, monsters that kicked travelers from cliffs, monsters that rolled, tracked, crushed, and waited. Their forms varied, but their role was consistent. They represented a world in which humanity had not yet secured a safe place. People lived under constant threat, and survival depended on avoiding forces too powerful to fight. Above the plain near Tsé Bit'a'í lived another terror, a pair of enormous winged predators. Their bodies were larger than any bird known today. Their wings cast shadows across the ground, and their talons could close around an adult human being. The summit of the rock served as their nesting place. High on inaccessible ledges, beyond ordinary climbing routes, the pair raised their young. From that height, they could watch every traveler moving across the exposed desert below. The flat country offered little shelter. A person crossing alone could be seen from miles away. Imagine that journey from the ground. A hunter leaves camp before sunrise, hoping to cross the plain before the heat becomes severe. The rock stands in the distance, dark against the morning. Nothing moves above it. Hours pass, the traveler begins to believe the sky is empty. Then a small shape circles high over the spire. It is so distant that it could be dismissed as a speck of dust or an ordinary bird. Slowly, the shape turns, its wings narrow. It stops circling and begins to fall. The first warning is the shadow. It races over the ground faster than any running animal. The traveler looks up, but the sun makes the descending shape difficult to see. By the time the wings open and the talons extend, there is nowhere to hide. The creature strikes, closes its claws around the person, and rises. The ground drops away. Familiar ridges become lines, camps become dots. The black summit grows closer as the bird carries its captive toward the ledges where the young are waiting. The stories describe a cruelty more deliberate than simple predation. The adult birds did not always bring their captives directly to the nest. They climbed above the summit and released them. The victim fell the full height of the formation, striking the rocks below or landing where the young could feed. The pattern repeated until it became part of the terror surrounding the place. Hunt, seize, carry, climb, drop, feed. Then the adults returned to the sky and searched the plain again. Such a threat created fear, not only of the rock, but of openness itself. A person could watch the ground, listen for footsteps, and avoid a dangerous canyon. No one could watch every part of the sky. The attack came from above, from silence and distance. The very emptiness of the desert became dangerous because it left travelers exposed. The people could neither climb to the nest nor easily strike creatures that controlled the air. For a long time, the monster birds seemed untouchable. The traditions of the early world do not leave humanity in that condition forever. The monsters were powerful, but their rule was not meant to endure. Help came through Changing Woman, one of the most important holy figures in Diné tradition. She is associated with life, renewal, the earth, and the cycles through which age and youth return. She gave birth to twin sons whose father was the sun. The boys grew with unusual speed and soon understood that the people around them lived in a world still dominated by monsters. The elder twin resolved to find his father and ask for weapons capable of defeating them. The path to the sun was not an ordinary journey. It crossed dangers designed to destroy anyone who attempted to pass, crushing rocks, cutting reeds, burning sands, and other obstacles belonging to the border between human space and the realm of powerful beings. The twins survived because spirit helpers guided them. Spider-Woman, small in size but immense in wisdom, gave protection and counsel. With that help, they reached the turquoise house of the sun at the edge of the sky. The sun did not immediately accept them. He tested the twins to determine whether they were truly his children and whether they possessed the courage required for the task ahead. They survived every trial. Once satisfied, the sun gave them armor of hardened flint and weapons formed from lightning. These were not ordinary bows and arrows. They carried the force of storms, the only power capable of piercing monsters whose bodies resisted human weapons. The elder twin returned to the earth, transformed in purpose and identity. He became Naye Nezgani, Monster Slayer. Monster Slayer began with the greatest threats. He confronted Yeitso, and their battle shook the land. With the lightning weapons given by the sun, he brought down the giant. Then he hunted the horned monster, the kicking monster, the tracking beings, and the other destroyers that had made human life unsafe. Each victory changed the world. Roots opened, families could move, the ground became less dangerous, yet the monsters of Tsé Bit'a'í remained because their home presented a problem strength alone could not solve. The summit could not be approached unnoticed. The plains surrounding the rock offered no concealment. Even if Monster Slayer could climb the broken walls, the birds would see him long before he reached their nest. They could strike from above or simply remain beyond the range of his weapons. He needed a way to enter the place no human being had reached alive. The solution required him to reverse the hunt. Rather than approaching the monsters as a warrior, he would approach them as prey. Monster Slayer walked alone onto the open plain. He carried the protection of the holy people and the lightning weapons of the sun, but he did not hide. He stood where the birds could see him clearly, a solitary figure against flat ground. The rock rose before him. The sky remained empty for a time. Then one of the great birds appeared above the summit. It circled once, recognized the opportunity, folded its wings, and dropped. The creature descended with the same terrible speed it had used against countless victims. Monster Slayer did not run. He waited until the shadow covered him and the talons closed around his body. Then the bird climbed. The warrior who had defeated giants was now being carried helplessly through the sky, or so the creature believed. Below him, the desert widened. Ahead, the dark summit rose. The bird passed the lower ledges, climbed above the nesting place, and prepared to release its captive. Monster Slayer fell. The stones below had broken many people, but he was not unprotected. His flint armor, the power of the holy people, and in some tellings a small feather given by a spirit helper, slowed or shielded his descent. Instead of being destroyed, he landed alive near the nest. The plan had worked. He had allowed the monster to carry him through the only route by which a human being could reach the summit. The two young birds stared at him from the nest. They had expected food. Instead, a living warrior stood before them. The adult predators were still in the air. and the battle that followed belonged to the highest point in the world, known to the people below. When the parent birds returned, they found Monster Slayer waiting with lightning in his hands. The confrontation unfolded on narrow stone ledges surrounded by open sky. One by one, the winged monsters were struck down. Their bodies fell from the formation they had ruled. The air above the plain became empty. For the first time within the memory carried by the story, people could look toward the summit without expecting a great shadow to descend. The cycle of capture and death had ended. Yet Monster Slayer still faced the two young creatures in the nest. They were the offspring of the predators he had destroyed, and they could grow into the same danger. The expected solution would have been simple: kill them before they became monsters. He did not. Monster Slayer lifted the first young bird and told it that its nature would change. It would no longer hunt the people. It would become the eagle, flying high and clean above the earth. Its feathers would serve the people in prayer and ceremony, carrying their words upward toward the holy beings. The creature changed in his hands. The destructive power of height and flight became sacred power. The bird that might have grown into a hunter of human beings became a messenger between the earth and the sky. He lifted the second fledgling and gave it another role. It would become the owl, moving through darkness and offering signs, warnings, and knowledge. Its voice at night would not be ignored. The creature changed, and the owl entered the world as a being whose presence could carry meaning. The transformation did not erase the frightening origin of either bird, it redirected it. What had threatened the people was given a place within the order of life. That transformation remains one of the deepest elements of the story. The monsters are not simply removed, their children become two birds of extraordinary spiritual importance. Eagle feathers remain sacred, carefully handled, and used in significant prayers and blessings. The owl remains associated with warnings and messages that demand attention. The descendants of the winged predators continue to move above the people, but their relationship to humanity has changed from hunger to guidance. The story therefore refuses an easy division between evil and good. The same power that once carried people toward death becomes the power that carries prayers toward the sacred. The same darkness that once concealed danger becomes a source of warning. Terror is not forgotten, denied, or destroyed. It is transformed into responsibility. Even the offspring of monsters are given a future in which their strength serves life rather than consuming it. Monster Slayer then discovered a problem almost hidden beneath the victory. He had reached the summit in the talons of a creature that now lay dead below. He had solved the impossible task of getting up, but he had no ordinary way to return. The walls were too steep, the ledges too unstable, and the descent too dangerous. Different tellings offer different helpers. In some, a bat carries or guides him down. In others, Spider-Woman or another holy being provides the means. Whatever the variation, Monster Slayer does not leave the sacred height through his own strength alone. He returns to the people, and the world below Tsé Bit'a'í changes. The open plain can be crossed without the old terror. The rock remains, holding the memory of the nest, the victims, the battle, and the transformation of the fledglings. This is why the older name cannot be reduced to a simple comparison with a bird. Tsé Bit'a'í is not merely descriptive, it is narrative compressed into language. The words contain the rescue bird, the monster birds, the hero carried upward, the battle, and the sacred birds born from danger. Then another history arrives. During the 19th century, English-speaking settlers, soldiers, traders, and surveyors entered the region with their own habits of naming. They saw the formation from a distance and compared it to a clipper ship under full sail. The comparison made sense within their world. Ships represented long journeys, commerce, military reach, adventure, and empire. A black rock crossing a pale desert could be imagined as a vessel crossing an ocean. Their name was recorded, repeated, and eventually printed onto maps. Once a name appears on an official map, it gains authority. Travelers repeat it, guidebooks explain it, road signs reinforce it. The older name may continue within the community that has always used it, but outsiders begin to treat the newer label as neutral and universal. Shiprock became the public identity of the formation, while Tsé Bit'a'í and the stories attached to it were pushed toward the margins of travel writing and popular history. The renaming did not physically erase the rock or silence Diné tradition, but it changed what most visitors expected to see. A person approaching Shiprock looks for a ship. The shape becomes scenery, a natural landmark suitable for photographs. A person approaching Tsé Bit'a'í enters a place connected with rescue, monsters, sacred birds, and one of the defining victories of the early world. The stone is identical, yet the experience changes because the name determines which story reaches the observer first. Science offers another name for the formation, a volcanic neck. Millions of years ago, magma hardened within the interior of an ancient volcanic system. Over immense spans of time, wind and erosion removed the softer surrounding material, leaving the resistant core exposed. The long walls radiating across the plain are volcanic dikes, sheets of hardened magma that filled fractures underground and remained after neighboring rock wore away. Geologically, Tsé Bit'a'í is an extraordinary but understandable structure. This explanation is supported by observation, mapping, and the broader study of volcanic landforms. It does not compete with the traditional story because it answers a different question. Geology explains how the stone formed. The Diné traditions explain what the place means, how it relates to the people, and why its summit carries sacred danger. One account examines magma and erosion. The other preserves identity, moral order, and memory through narrative. Reducing either one to the other would lose something essential. Yet the older story leaves a question that continues to attract curiosity. Why wings? Why a nest at the summit? Why giant predators carrying human beings from an exposed plain? The formation's dikes can resemble wings, and its isolated height naturally suggests a nesting place for powerful sky beings. Symbolic interpretation may be sufficient. The monster birds can embody storms, danger, predation, or the vulnerability of people traveling across open ground. Monster Slayer's victory can represent courage, protection, and the establishment of order. Still, similar images appear in many indigenous traditions across North America. Different nations preserve stories of immense birds, thunder beings, sky creatures, and predators associated with high places, storms, and enormous strength. These traditions are not identical, and they should never be collapsed into a single, generalized myth. Each belongs to its own language, history, ceremonial life, and landscape. But the recurrence of great winged beings reveals how powerfully the sky shaped human imagination and experience across the continent. Some listeners wonder whether these stories preserve memories of actual animals, rare encounters, extinct species, or misunderstood natural events. Others see them primarily as spiritual narratives. The surviving traditions do not offer a laboratory record, and forcing them into modern categories can distort their meaning. A story does not have to function as literal zoology to preserve real knowledge. It may hold warnings about weather, terrain, predation, sacred boundaries, social responsibility, or the dangers of traveling alone. Oral tradition works by making memory unforgettable. Before written archives, knowledge had to survive in the minds and voices of people. A warning stated plainly might disappear after a few generations. A warning bound to a monster, a hero, a sacred place, and a transformation could endure for centuries. The landscape itself became a memory device. Every time the black spire appeared on the horizon, the story returned. Every repetition of Tsé Bit'a'í reopened the archive. This is why place names matter. A name can carry directions, ownership, history, danger, prayer, or memory. When newcomers replace an indigenous name with one drawn from their own imagination, they do more than substitute words. They change which knowledge becomes visible. The new name may be harmless in intention, but it can cover a much older relationship between people and place. Shiprock is a clear example because the two names produce radically different understandings of the same formation. One name is based on resemblance, the other is based on relationship. Shiprock asks what the spire looks like to someone passing through. Tsé Bit'a'í asks what the rock has meant to those who lived beneath it, traveled around it, prayed near it, and carried its stories across generations. The first name belongs to the eye. The second belongs to memory. The distinction becomes especially important at the summit. Modern climbing culture often treats an isolated peak as a challenge. Difficulty increases attraction. Reaching the top becomes proof of courage, skill, or endurance. Climbers photograph themselves against the horizon and describe the ascent as conquering the formation. But within the Diné tradition, Tsé Bit'a'í is not an object awaiting conquest. Its upper ledges belong to a story in which ordinary human beings were never meant to stand there. The summit was the nest of the winged monsters. It was the place where victims were carried and released. Monster Slayer reached it only by offering himself as bait and relying on sacred protection. Even after victory, he required help to return. To treat that summit as recreational space ignores the meaning that makes the formation more than stone. It enters a sacred narrative without permission and turns a place of memory into a personal achievement. Climbing has been prohibited since 1970. Fatal accidents and unstable rock contributed to the closure, but respect for Navajo religious concerns is central. The formation stands within the Navajo Nation, and the request is not difficult to understand: do not climb. Visitors can view it from public roads and designated areas, but the rock is not a stage, a trophy, or an obstacle placed there for outsiders to overcome. Respect begins by accepting that access is not the same as entitlement. Today, thousands of travelers still pass the formation. They see it rising from the desert, stop beside the road, take photographs, and continue toward another destination. Most never hear the older name. Fewer still hear the full story of the rescue bird, the monster nest, the human prey, Monster Slayer, the lightning weapons, or the transformation of the fledglings. The modern encounter lasts minutes. The traditional relationship spans generations. Yet Tsé Bit'a'í has not disappeared. The name survives in the language, and the stories continue because the people who carry them continue. The map may privilege Shiprock, but maps are only one form of record. Spoken language is another, ceremony is another, respect for a sacred place is another. A road sign can direct traffic, but it cannot decide which name holds the deepest truth about belonging. Return to the horizon at sunset. The desert becomes pale gold, then red, then grey. The spire darkens until it appears almost black. Wind pushes dust around its base, and the stone dikes stretch outward like shadows. From far away, the silhouette may still resemble a ship. That image belongs to the traveler, the surveyor, and the mapmaker. It is not entirely false, it is simply shallow compared with what came before. The older name asks you to look again. The wings are not decorative. They carry people to safety in one tradition and carry victims toward death in another. They belong to monsters and to sacred birds. They lift Monster Slayer toward the place where the final threat can be confronted. They connect terror with prayer, darkness with warning, and destruction with transformation. All of that survives inside 3 words: the rock with wings. The story does not demand that every listener interpret the monster birds literally. It does demand that the place be approached with humility. A sacred narrative is not made less meaningful because its language is mythic. Myth, in this context, does not mean falsehood. It means a form large enough to hold history, identity, morality, danger, and spiritual understanding at once. The question is not whether a modern visitor can prove every event. The question is whether the visitor can recognize that the land was never empty of meaning. The most important contrast is therefore not between science and tradition. It is between attention and indifference. Science can reveal the volcanic history of the formation without erasing Diné knowledge. Tradition can preserve sacred meaning without denying geology. The real loss occurs when visitors accept the newest name, take the photograph, and move on without asking what the older name remembers. Names can be overwritten, but they are difficult to destroy when people continue speaking them. Maps can be redrawn, but the horizon remains. The rock has watched generations arrive with different explanations, different languages, and different ambitions. It has been guardian, nest, landmark, volcanic neck, climbing objective, sacred place, and photographic icon. Yet beneath every later description stands Tsé Bit'a'í. Perhaps that is why the formation feels different after the older name is spoken aloud. The stone does not change, yet the horizon does. What seemed like an isolated landmark becomes the center of a world. The air above it becomes part of the story. The ledges become a nest, a battlefield, and a boundary. The silence acquires meaning because silence is what remained after the last monster fell and the sky became safe. A name can tell a traveler where to stop. A name can tell that traveler how to stand there, what to respect, and what questions should be carried away. Tsé Bit'a'í survives because it does more than identify a place. It teaches a relationship to that place, and it asks listeners to approach the rock not as an object, but as memory visible. The next time that black spire appears alone above the desert, remember that the ship was never the beginning of the story. The ocean was imagined by strangers. The sails existed only in resemblance. Long before either entered the map, the people of Diné looked toward the summit and remembered wings. Wings that rescued, wings that hunted, wings that carried a hero into danger, and wings transformed into eagle and owl. The ship belongs to the surface of the rock. The wings belong to its memory.